She thought she had escaped. 5 years in hiding, changing her name, building a new life from the ashes, and she believed no one remembered her anymore. But there was one person who never forgot. There was one person who had silently stood between her and the darkness all those years, without her knowing. Today, the darkness has returned, and the man she thought had abandoned her has emerged from that darkness. If you're reading this story, please like and comment the city you're reading in so I know how far my story has progressed. Don't leave, because the best part is just beginning. The morning Lena Ashcroft realized she was being watched, she had flour on her hands and a dead arrangement of ranunculus on the work table in front of her. It wasn't the flour that made her stop. It was the SUV. Black. No plates visible from this angle. Parked 3 storefronts down across the narrow 2-lane street that ran through the center of Crestwick, a coastal town so small that strangers stuck out like splinters under skin. She'd seen it yesterday morning, too, idling near the pharmacy while she walked Maisie to school. She'd told herself it was nothing. A contractor, maybe? Someone visiting one of the seasonal rentals. She turned back to the ranunculus and began stripping the lower leaves. The stems were soft in the wrong way. Too much water, not enough drainage. Another shipment gone bad because her supplier didn't understand that flowers were living things with opinions. She pressed her thumbnail against one stem and felt it give, mushy and hollow at the core. She tossed the whole bunch into the waste bin beside the work table. Behind her, the shop door opened and the little brass bell above it rang. "We're not open yet," she said without turning around. "Sign says 9. A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Lena pulled a rag from her apron pocket and wiped her hands slowly. When she turned around, the man was already inside, standing just past the entry mat. Mid-40s, heavy across the shoulders, the kind of build that comes not from a gym, but from moving things that resist being moved. He was wearing a gray jacket that was slightly too warm for the season, and he was looking at her arrangement wall with an expression of polite interest that didn't match his eyes at all. "We're setting up," she said. "Come back at 9:15. He looked at her then. "You Lena? Owner?" She kept her voice flat. "That's what the sign says." "Nice place." He moved toward the bucket display along the left wall without being invited. His hands stayed in his jacket pockets. "You do weddings?" "I do whatever I'm paid to do." "Good answer." He picked up a stem of dusty Miller, turned it over in his fingers. "You been here long? In Crestwick?" Something cold dropped through her chest. Not fear exactly, more like recognition, the specific alertness of a woman who had spent years learning to identify the moment a conversation stopped being a conversation. "Long enough?" she said. "You looking for wedding florals or not?" He set the stem back, smiled. It didn't travel to his eyes at all. "Maybe. My boss is getting married in the spring. He's particular about flowers." He reached into his jacket pocket, slow, deliberate, and set a business card on the nearest display table. He'd want to meet the florist personally, to discuss the arrangement. He walked out. The bell rang again. Lena didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Then she walked to the card and looked at it without picking it up. No name, no business. Just a phone number printed in clean black type on matte white stock. The kind of card that costs more per unit than she spent on lunch. She picked it up by the corner, walked to the back of the shop, and locked it in the small fireproof box she kept under the sink behind her potting supplies, next to the spare key to the apartment above the shop, next to the roll of cash she maintained at all times for reasons she didn't examine too closely. Then she went to the window and looked at the street. The black SUV was gone. Maisie was 8 years old and had opinions about everything. She had opinions about the color of her backpack straps, about which cereal had the correct ratio of marshmallows to puffs, about whether it was acceptable for a person to say they liked a song without knowing all the words. She had her mother's dark eyes and a gap between her front teeth that made her look perpetually on the edge of a secret. She talked constantly and without self-consciousness in the way that some children do before the world teaches them to be careful. Lena loved her with a ferocity that occasionally frightened her. She picked Maisie up from school at 3:15, which meant locking the shop early, which meant losing the afternoon foot traffic, which she couldn't afford but did anyway because the alternative was Maisie walking the 6 blocks home alone, and that particular alternative was not something Lena was willing to consider. Not since she'd noticed the SUV. Not since the man in the gray jacket. Mrs. Henley says we're doing a diorama about ocean ecosystems, Maisie said, walking fast to keep pace with Lena's longer stride. I want to do the deep zone, the dark part, with the anglerfish. Good choice. Dylan said anglerfish are too scary for a school project. I told him scary isn't a reason to not do something. That's called avoidance behavior. Lena looked at her. Where did you hear that? You said it about the spiders in the storage room. I said we should deal with the spiders, not avoid them. Same thing. Maisie tugged at her sleeve. Can we get the kit from the craft store? The one with the waterproof clay? Maybe this weekend. You always say maybe this weekend. And sometimes it happens. Maisie made a sound of theatrical despair and kicked a pebble off the sidewalk. Lena watched it skip into the gutter and kept walking, watching the street over Maisie's head with the part of her mind she'd trained to run quietly in the background at all times, cataloging vehicles, registering unfamiliar faces, tracking anyone who walked at the same pace for more than half a block. The street was quiet. The late afternoon light was doing something beautiful with the harbor water visible between the buildings at the end of Main Street, turning everything amber and copper, and for a moment Lena let herself believe that this was all there was. This street, this town, this child with her hand tugging at her sleeve and her serious opinions about anglerfish. Then she saw the van. White panel van, parked in the loading zone outside the hardware store. Nothing unusual about that, but the engine was running. She steered Maisie gently but firmly to the inside of the sidewalk, putting herself between her daughter and the street. Mom, you're going too fast. Sorry, baby. She slowed by half a step. The van didn't move. When they passed it, she glanced at the side mirror, could see the driver. A young man, baseball cap pulled low, phone in his hand, apparently absorbed in the screen. She kept walking. By the time they reached the corner, her heartbeat had mostly settled. She told herself, it's nothing. She'd been telling herself that for 5 years. What? The shop's name, Wild Bloom, had been Maisie's idea, or close to it. Lena had said they needed something that sounded alive, and Maisie had looked up from her coloring book and said, without looking up, Wild Things That Bloom. Which wasn't a name exactly, but it was close enough. The space was narrow and deep, a former stationery shop that still smelled faintly of old paper beneath the layers of floral damp and soil and the green, working scent of things growing in buckets. Lena had painted the walls herself, a muted sage that turned different colors depending on the hour of the day. The front window display changed with the seasons. Right now it held a cascade of autumn clematis and drying oak leaf hydrangea that she was actually proud of, which was rare enough to be notable. She'd built this from nothing. From $38 over rent and a borrowed pickup truck and $300 in wholesale inventory she'd priced into the red to get the first few regulars through the door. She had accounts with 2 local hotels and a wedding venue 40 minutes down the coast, and 3 recurring clients who ordered weekly arrangements. And none of it was enough to be comfortable, but all of it was enough to survive. And survival, Lena had learned, was its own form of wealth. What she didn't know, what she had never known, was that the shop's survival was not entirely her own doing. The landlord who'd agreed to hold her rent in arrears for 6 weeks during a slow January had received a call from a man he'd never met, reminding him that certain zoning variances he'd obtained without proper documentation could be reviewed by the county at any time. He'd agreed to the arrangement in under 4 minutes. The loan she'd applied for at the Crestwick Community Credit Union, the one that had gone through on terms better than her credit score should have warranted, had been quietly guaranteed by a holding company registered in Delaware with no visible connection to anything. The man who had followed her home from the night market 3 summers ago, a heavy-set man with a particular way of looking at women alone, he had been found the following week in a hospital in a neighboring county with both wrists broken in clean, deliberate fractures, and had declined to make a police report. Lena knew none of this. She was currently trying to figure out whether she could afford to hire seasonal help for the upcoming flower festival, which the town held every October along the Harbor Walk, and which represented approximately 1/3 of her annual revenue, and which required more bodies than she possessed. She was also trying not to think about the man in the gray jacket. She was failing at the second one. Damien Voss had not slept in 36 hours. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the reason, not operations, not negotiations, not the kind of controlled crisis management that constituted approximately half of his working life. The reason was a surveillance report on his desk, delivered by a man named Reyes, who had been working intelligence for him for 4 years and who was careful with language in the way that only people who had been punished for imprecision tended to be careful. The report was 8 pages. Damien had read it twice. The Veris Syndicate, out of Bucharest originally, now operating through a shell network spread across 6 countries, had obtained a name. The name was not Lena Ashcroft. It was the name she'd been born with, the name she'd buried under a legal process that had cost him more to arrange than most people made in 5 years, the name that connected her to a period in her life that connected her to him. They hadn't confirmed her location yet, but they were close, within a margin he didn't find acceptable. He was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the 43rd floor, looking down at the harbor. From here, on a clear day, he could see the water all the way to the outer islands. He couldn't see Crestwick from here. It was 26 miles north along the coast. But he looked in that direction anyway, the way he always did when the weight of it pressed against the inside of his chest. "They're running the name through property records," Reyes said from behind him. He was leaning against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, watching Damien with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that there were things his employer did not discuss and questions that did not get asked. If they cross-reference it with the assumed identities database they bought from the Latvian group last spring, they'll hit Ashcroft inside of a week, maybe less. Less. Damien said it flat. Not a question. Their analyst is good. Whoever they're running this through, they know what they're doing. Damien turned from the window. He was 41 years old and carried it in a way that suggested the years had not been kind so much as instructive. The scar along his jaw, a thin, white line that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, was old enough to be unremarkable. His eyes were the gray of water under cloud cover, and when he was thinking, which was most of the time, they went very still. "Expand the Crestwick team," he said. "I want 2 additional units on the perimeter. Rotate the vehicle schedule. They may have already flagged our current patterns." "Already flagged?" Reyes cleared his throat. "We also have a problem. Norris." Damien looked at him. "He went off script this morning." Reyes kept his voice even. "Went into the shop, made contact. The temperature in the room didn't change, but something shifted in it anyway. He went into the shop," Damien said. "He had a theory that direct contact would give us better intelligence on her daily patterns. He didn't clear it with, 'Where is he now?'" "Conference room B." Damien moved toward the door. Reyes stepped aside without being asked. Norris was a large man, and he sat in the conference room chair with the particular stillness of someone who understood that stillness was currently his best option. He was 46, former military, good instincts usually, and right now he was looking at Damien Voss with the expression of a person who had recently realized he had made an error in judgment that was going to have consequences. "You made contact," Damien said. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table with his hands in his pockets, and his voice at a register that people who had known him for years identified as considerably more dangerous than shouting. "I was gathering field intelligence," Norris said. "Visual surveillance has limits. You needed." Damien let the words sit there. "She is alone. She has an 8-year-old child. She has spent 5 years building a life on the assumption that nobody knows where she is, and you walked into her shop." Norris didn't answer. "She will have noticed," Damien said. "She noticed everything. She noticed the vehicle rotation 2 days ago. My analyst flagged a change in her route. She's been taking the long way home since Tuesday. She's careful because careful is what she learned to be. And now you have given her a reason to be more careful, which means she may move, which means we lose coverage, which means—" He stopped, pressed 2 fingers against his temple. "You're off the Crestwick detail." "Sir, you're off the detail. Reyes will brief your replacement. You're on the Hadley account until I decide otherwise." Norris nodded, stood, left without speaking. Damien stood alone in the conference room for a moment. The city spread out below the window here, too. A different angle, the financial district, towers of glass and steel, and the constant, indifferent movement of money. He had built an empire in this city. He controlled more of its moving parts than the people who ran it publicly would have been comfortable acknowledging. He had leverage over people in positions of real power, and he had people in rooms where decisions were made, and he had built all of it from almost nothing over a span of 15 years through a combination of precision and ruthlessness, and a particular kind of patience that most people in his industry didn't last long enough to develop. And none of it, not a single piece of it, felt as significant to him as the problem of a flower shop 26 miles up the coast. He took out his phone, pulled up the surveillance feed, not a live camera, which would have been a different kind of violation he'd argued with himself about more than once, but a passive exterior sensor that monitored the approach to the building. The feed showed the shop front, the flower buckets outside, the hand-lettered window display, a woman moving behind the glass, her shadow crossing the window. Too distant and too blurred to resolve into a face, but he knew the way she moved. He had spent years knowing it. He put the phone away. He needed to find out everything the Varys syndicate knew, dismantle the channel through which they'd obtained the name, and do it fast enough that they never confirmed the location. That was the job. That was what had to happen. He would not go to Crestwick. He had made that decision years ago, and the reasons for it had not changed. His presence there was the one thing that could accelerate the danger rather than contain it. He was the target. Everything dangerous about Lena's situation was connected to him, and the best thing he could do, the only responsible thing, was to stay away and manage the threat from a distance. He believed this. He sat down at the conference room table and opened the file on the Varys Syndicate's financial network and began to work. 3 days later, a delivery arrived at Wild Bloom. There was nothing unusual about this. Deliveries arrived regularly, wholesale shipments, supply orders, the occasional package from online vendors. Lena signed for them without much ceremony. This one was different because she hadn't ordered it. The box was plain white, unmarked except for her shop name, hand-lettered in clean printed capitals. Inside, packed in tissue paper, was a single stem of ghost orchid, an impossibly rare thing, difficult to cultivate, difficult to source, worth more than she'd net in a week. There was no card. She held it for a moment, turning it in the light. The petals were almost translucent. It looked less like a flower and more like something that had no business existing in the ordinary world. She put it in water because she didn't know what else to do with it. She thought about the man in the gray jacket. She thought about the business card in the fireproof box. She thought about the running engine in the panel van. That night, after Maisie was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a notepad, and she wrote down every unusual thing that had happened in the past 2 weeks in the order it had happened, the way her mother had once taught her to process a threat, quietly, systematically, without flinching from what the list said when you looked at all of it together. When she was done, she read it over twice. Then she turned the pad face down on the table and sat in the dark for a long time. Someone knew where she was. The question that was keeping her from thinking clearly was not whether to be afraid. She was already afraid. The question, the one she turned over and over in the dark without landing anywhere comfortable, was whether whoever was watching her wanted to hurt her, or whether, against everything logic suggested, they were doing something else entirely. She didn't let herself finish that thought. There was no productive end to it. She went to bed. She lay awake until 3 in the morning, listening to the sound of the harbor, the water, the occasional creak of the old building settling around her, and Maisie, and the small, hard-won life they had made here together. When she finally slept, she dreamed of nothing. The town's annual Crestwick Harbor Flower Festival was 9 days away when the second strange thing happened. She'd been approached before by sponsors, local businesses wanting to co-brand, regional tourism boards looking for photogenic content, a lifestyle blogger who had suggested a collaboration that Lena had declined with more politeness than she'd felt. None of that was strange. What was strange was the man who came in on a Wednesday afternoon, quiet and professional, and introduced himself as representing a private events company she'd never heard of, and offered to cover the cost of her entire festival booth, setup, materials, inventory, in exchange for permission to display a small logo in her signage. The amount he named was equivalent to what she usually netted from the entire festival. "That's not a sponsorship," she said. "That's a buyout." He blinked. We're a small company. We value community presence. No company values community presence to this degree. She set down the arrangement she'd been working on. Who sent you? He looked mildly puzzled. I'm not sure I understand. Who is actually paying for this? A pause. Small, but real. The company has multiple stakeholders. Thank you for coming in, she said. She walked to the door and held it open. He left. She locked the door behind him, turned the sign to close 20 minutes early, and stood in the middle of her shop in the afternoon light with her hands pressed flat against the work table and her breathing careful and deliberate. Someone was trying to take care of her. Someone had been trying to take care of her, quietly, invisibly, for longer than she wanted to think about. And the taking care of was generous and thorough in a way that required resources she'd never had and couldn't have imagined. And there was exactly one person in her history who had possessed resources at that scale. Exactly one person. She'd spent 5 years not saying his name, not even in the privacy of her own head, because names were hooks, and hooks caught things, and she could not afford to be caught. But standing there in her shop in the thin October light, she said it. Damien. The word dropped into the silence of the shop and hung there. She didn't know if she felt relief or something worse. She was still standing there, not moving, not finishing the thought, when the sound she'd been trained to dread, a child's scream, high and sudden, cut off almost immediately, coming from the direction of Maisie's school 2 blocks away, punched through the window glass like a fist through paper and stopped her heart cold. The scream lasted maybe 2 seconds. That was enough. Lena was out the door before she'd made a conscious decision to move. The shop key still in her hand, the sign still flipped to closed, the ghost orchid sitting in its water glass on the counter behind her. The October air hit her face, cold and sharp with salt from the harbor, and she was already running before her body had finished processing what she'd heard. 2 blocks. She counted them without meaning to, the way her legs measured distance in emergencies. The drugstore corner, the dry cleaners, the gap between the hardware store and the insurance office where the alley cut through to the school's side entrance. She went through the alley, faster. The schoolyard was visible from the end of the alley, separated from her by a chain-link fence and 40 feet of cracked concrete. Dismissal had ended 40 minutes ago, which meant the yard should have been empty. It was not. There were 3 kids still on the far end of the yard near the climbing structure. 2 teachers standing by the main building's side door, one of them holding a phone to her ear. And there was a gap in the cluster of children that Lena's eyes went to immediately, the way eyes go to the shape of a thing that's missing. The outline of a space where Maisie should have been standing. Maisie was not there. Lena hit the chain-link gate, shoved it open, crossed the yard in 8 seconds. The teacher with the phone, Ms. Tanner, early 30s, good with Maisie, normally composed, looked up with an expression that told Lena everything before a single word was spoken. "Where is she?" Lena said. "Mrs. Ashcroft. Where is my daughter?" "We were walking out to the after-school group," Ms. Tanner said. Her voice was trying to be steady and not quite getting there. Maisie stopped to tie her shoe by the gate, and I went ahead 2 steps, and when I turned around, how long ago? 5 minutes, maybe 6. I called 911 immediately. Lena was already turning back to the gate, the side street that ran along the school's fence. She scanned it in both directions. Empty. A truck turning the far corner, already half a block away. A bicycle leaned against a telephone pole, unattended. And on the ground, just outside the gate, a single sneaker. Maisie's sneaker. The left one, purple with a white stripe. The Velcro strap that Maisie had been resisting learning to replace with proper laces for 2 years because Velcro was faster. Lena crouched and picked it up and held it in both hands, and something happened in her chest that was not a sound and not a thought, but something older and more animal than either. She stood up. She did not cry. She was nowhere close to crying. What she felt was colder and more focused than grief. Something that narrowed her entire consciousness down to a single operational point. Find her. Everything else was noise. She took out her phone. She did not call 911. 911 was already coming. 911 would do what 911 did. Cordon, question, document, follow procedure at the speed of procedure, which was not fast enough. Not for this. Not for a 6-minute window in which a child could be put in a vehicle and driven to distances that made recovery statistically complicated. She scrolled to a number she had saved in her phone under the name of a flower supplier she'd never actually used, and she stared at it, and every reason she'd spent 5 years building for why she would never use this number rearranged themselves into something irrelevant. She pressed call. It rang twice. Ashcroft. The voice was not Damien's, a woman's voice, professional and careful. We have the situation. Our team is already moving. Lena's hand tightened on the phone. You have people here. We've had people here for some time. Where is she? Not a question. A demand, delivered at a register she didn't recognize in herself. We don't have her position confirmed yet. We're working on it. I need you to go back to your shop and stay there. That's not happening. Ms. Ashcroft, tell me who has my daughter, or I will walk into the middle of this street and start screaming Damien Voss's name until someone comes to explain it to me. A pause. Short. Then, go to your shop. Lock the door. Someone will be there in 4 minutes. The line went dead. What? The someone was a woman named Carver. She arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, not 4, which told Lena something about how long she'd actually been stationed nearby. She was maybe 35, medium height, wearing a canvas jacket that had seen genuine use, and she moved through Lena's shop door like she'd already mapped the interior from the outside, which she probably had. She did not offer a handshake. She went directly to the front window, looked out at the street from the side of the frame without standing in front of the glass, then turned and looked at Lena. You should sit down, she said. Start talking. Carver looked at her for a moment with the flat appraisal of someone recalibrating expectations. Then she sat down herself, on the stool near the counter, and leaned her forearms on her knees. The group that took Maisie goes by Varus. They operate out of Eastern Europe, but they've had a U.S. network for about 3 years. They've been trying to identify your location for approximately 6 weeks. Why? Because you're connected to Damien Voss. And what they want from Damien Voss, they figured out they can't get through direct confrontation. So they went sideways. She kept her eyes on Lena's face. You and Maisie are leverage. That's the only value you have to them, which means she's not in danger yet. She's more valuable intact. Yet, Lena said. I'm not going to lie to you about the timeline. How long has he had people watching me? Carver's expression shifted by something too small to name. That's not my information to give. How long? Another pause. Since before you left. The words landed in the shop like something dropped from a height. Lena turned away from her, faced the work table, looked at the surface of it, the soil residue, the water rings from buckets, the heel marks of stems stripped down over years of repetitive motion. She put both hands flat on it. He never stopped, she said. Not a question. No, Carver said. And he didn't tell me. His position was that I know what his position was. She straightened, turned back. What do your people know right now, right this second? Where is she? We have partial tracking. There was a vehicle, white panel van, 2 males confirmed, heading north on Harbor Road approximately 4 minutes after the grab. We have a team in pursuit, but we've lost visual. We're running plate data now, but the plates will be clean. These people don't make obvious errors. The van. Lena felt something click into place. Tuesday, outside the hardware store. Carver's eyes sharpened. You saw it. Running engine, driver with a phone. I thought... She stopped. I told myself it was nothing. How long ago was that? 4 days. I should have... She stopped again. She could not afford this right now. The should-haves were a room she did not have time to enter. Is Damien coming? He's been notified. That's not what I asked. Carver looked at her steadily. I don't make his operational decisions. Call him, Lena said. Right now, in front of me. Damien picked up on the first ring. Carver had put the phone on speaker without being asked, which suggested either good judgment or standing instructions. His voice came into the flower shop and Lena had to stand still for a moment just to let the sound of it exist in the room without it undoing something she couldn't afford to have undone. Lena. He said her name the way he'd always said it. 2 syllables, no decoration, like it was a fact he was stating rather than a word he was using. Tell me where my daughter is, she said. We're working on it. You've been watching me for 5 years. She kept her voice level. The levelness cost her something. You have operatives embedded in this town. You have surveillance on my shop. You have financial entanglements I didn't consent to with my landlord and my bank. You have been running an invisible security operation around my life without telling me, and someone still took my daughter. Silence on the line, not the absence of things to say, the presence of things being weighed. Yes, he said. That's your answer. I don't have a better one. I don't want a better one. She pressed her fingers against the work table. I want Maisie back. Tell me what you know. A pause. She heard very faintly the sound of movement on his end. Papers, a keyboard, the low murmur of other voices in the background. He was already working. She recognized the sound of him working. She had spent years trying to forget what it sounded like. Varys is using a staging house. We've identified 3 properties in the county they've used before. We're doing thermal imaging on all 3 right now. The vehicle your woman described from Tuesday. We flagged it as a possible scout, but we couldn't confirm without exposing the surveillance. A beat. That's on me. Yes, she said. It is. Another silence. Different texture from the first one. The team in pursuit reacquired the van. It exited Harbor Road onto the county bypass and went east. That narrows the staging house candidates to 1. Where? Old Marin Cannery Complex, 12 miles out. It's been vacant for 3 years. It has truck access and water egress, and Varys has used waterfront properties in 4 previous operations. How many people inside? We don't know yet. The imaging? Estimate. 4 to 8, armed. When are you moving? A longer pause this time. She heard him breathe in, slow and deliberate, and she recognized that too. The specific breath he took before he said something he'd already decided but had been hoping not to have to say. I'm 40 minutes out, he said. Something moved in Lena's chest. You're coming. I was already on the road when Carver called. She didn't say anything. There was too much to say, and none of it was for right now. Stay with Carver, he said. Do not come to the cannery. Damien, Lena. His voice dropped a register. Not softer. More precise the way a blade is precise. I need you to trust me for the next 40 minutes. I understand that I have given you reasons not to. I understand what I did and what I didn't do and why. But right now I need you to stay where you are and let me bring her home. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then opened them. You have 40 minutes, she said, and ended the call. She lasted 22. Carver tried. She was professional and prepared, and she'd clearly been briefed on the specific challenge of keeping Lena Ashcroft stationary when she'd decided not to be. She positioned herself near the door. She offered water, food, updates. She kept her phone visible and provided information as it came in. At the 22-minute mark, the update that came in was that thermal imaging had confirmed a heat signature consistent with a child-sized individual in the northeast corner of the cannery's main processing floor, and that the surrounding signatures indicated 5 armed individuals, and that Damien's team was 4 minutes from the staging point. And Carver, delivering this information with professional calm, made the error of turning her head to check the front window while she spoke. The back door of Wild Bloom opened onto a service alley. Lena had used it every day for 5 years. The county bypass in the dark was a different road than it was in the daylight. Narrower feeling, the tree line pressing in on both sides, the occasional flash of reflective road markers appearing and disappearing in the headlights. Lena drove her van, the shop delivery van, 14 years old, still smelling of soil and plastic wrapping, at speeds it had not been designed for, and she gripped the wheel and did not let herself think about anything except the road and the next mile and the mile after that. Her phone rang at the 6-minute mark. She silenced it without looking. It rang again. She silenced it again. The 3rd time she answered it. Where are you? Carver's voice, very controlled, very unhappy. 12 miles east on the bypass. Ms. Ashcroft, you need to turn around. How far out is Damien's team? A pause. 2 minutes. Then I'm a minute behind them. Tell them. You're not trained for... I've been training for this for 5 years. She took a curve too fast and felt the van's rear end slide slightly before catching. I just didn't know what I was training for. Tell them I'm coming or don't, but I'm not turning around. She heard Carver speak rapidly to someone else, the phone partially muffled. Then, stay behind the perimeter. Do not enter the building. Copy, Lena said, because it was faster than arguing, and ended the call. She could see lights ahead. Not the cannery. That was still a quarter-mile off the bypass, down a gravel access road that she could see the turn for now, marked by a rusted sign she couldn't read at this speed. The lights were vehicles. Black SUVs pulled off the road just short of the turnoff, engines off, no interior lights. She pulled in behind them, got out, and a man she'd never seen materialized from the tree line and said, "Stay back," in a voice that carried no question in it. "I'm Lena Ashcroft," she said. A fraction of a second. Some communication she couldn't see. Then, "Stay behind the vehicles. Do not move until you're told." She moved behind the nearest SUV and looked toward the cannery. It was a long, low building on a narrow finger of land that jutted out into the harbor inlet, visible as a dark mass against the slightly lighter dark of the water. There were no exterior lights. There was no visible movement. It looked absolutely still and absolutely abandoned, and something about the quality of its stillness was wrong in a way that settled into her spine as a physical sensation. Then all the stillness ended at once. Fasten. She heard it before she saw it. A sound like a car door slamming, except it wasn't. It was a shaped charge on a side entrance that Damien's team blew without ceremony or announcement. A compressed concussive crack that sent a brief flash of light over the water and shook the ground under her feet, and she gripped the side of the SUV and held on. Then there was shouting, not panic, controlled shouts, the kind used to coordinate people in a space, and the sound of running, multiple sets of footsteps on concrete, and then 2 shots close together from inside the building, and then a longer silence than she could tolerate. She moved. The man from the tree line materialized again. "Ms. Ashcroft." "I heard gunshots. The team is handling... My daughter is in there." "I understand. Move," she said, and she said it with something in her face that made him hesitate for 1 second. 1 second that she used to step around him and walk toward the building. And he came after her, but he didn't stop her. Maybe because he'd been told she was coming, or maybe because of what was in her face, but she was moving and the building was in front of her, and she pushed through the blown entrance with her shoulder against the metal doorframe and stopped. The main processing floor of the cannery smelled of rust and standing water, and the particular cold of spaces that haven't been heated in years. Overhead, the structural beams ran the length of the ceiling, and what remained of the industrial equipment, long decommissioned, stripped mostly for scrap, cast enormous shadows in the light from the tactical flashlights of Damien's team, 4 of them that she could see, moving in practice patterns through the space. Against the far wall, near what had been a loading bay, there was a cluster of figures, and in the middle of them, held upright between 2 men she didn't know, being walked rapidly toward the exit, was Maisie. Maisie, with her shoes, one of them, the right one, and her backpack still on, and her face doing the expression Lena knew as the one she made when she was very frightened and was refusing to show it, the jaw set, the eyes very wide and very dry, looking straight ahead. "Maisie," Lena said. Maisie's face broke open. She crossed the distance between them at a dead run and hit Lena's arms going full speed. And Lena caught her and went down to one knee with the impact and held on with both arms wrapped completely around her and her face pressed into Maisie's hair. And Maisie was shaking hard and not crying, not yet, just shaking, gripping Lena's jacket with both fists with a strength that didn't seem proportional to an 8-year-old's hands. "I didn't scream again," Maisie said into Lena's neck. Her voice was uneven. "After the first time, I didn't scream. I remembered what you said. Don't give them information." "That's right," Lena said. Her own voice was doing something complicated. "That's exactly right. My shoe came off." "I have it. I have your shoe." "Is it in the van?" "It's in my pocket." Maisie exhaled, a long, shaky breath that went on longer than it started, the sound of a body releasing something it had been holding at significant cost. She didn't let go of Lena's jacket. Lena became aware slowly of footsteps approaching from behind her. One set, measured. She recognized the weight of them. She did not turn around immediately. She stayed on one knee on the cold concrete floor of the cannery, with her arms around her daughter, and she let the moment exist for just a few more seconds before she let the rest of the world back in. Then she turned. Damien Voss was standing 6 feet away, hands at his sides, looking at her and Maisie with an expression she did not have a word for. Not relief exactly, not grief, something that occupied the space where those two things met and resolved into something older and quieter than either. He looked the same. That was the thing that hit her with a force she hadn't prepared for. 5 years. The scar was still there. The gray at his temples was more pronounced. The eyes were the same eyes. He was looking at her the way he had always looked at her, with everything visible and nothing offered, the way a man looks when he has decided that what he feels is his own problem to manage. "Lena," he said. She stood up, kept one arm around Maisie, who had turned and was now looking at Damien with the particular intensity of a child running a calculation she doesn't have enough information to complete. "Who's that?" Maisie said. Lena looked at Damien. He looked at her. "Someone I used to know," she said. The words dropped into the cold air of the cannery and sat there, neither of them moving, neither of them looking away. And in the distance, from deeper in the building, from whatever remained of the Varus operation Damien's team was in the process of dismantling, there was the sound of something heavy falling, a crash of displaced metal that echoed through the structure and died. And in the silence that followed, Lena understood that whatever life she had built on the premise that the past was finished had just. She turned away from him first. That was important. She needed to be the one who turned away first, because if she waited for him to do it, she wasn't sure she could hold the thing in her chest together with enough structural integrity to function, and functioning was what the next several hours required. She pulled Maisie closer and walked toward the blown entrance, toward the cold air and the sound of the harbor water beyond the building's edge, and she did not look back. Carver met her at the door. She looked at Lena with an expression that balanced professional relief against genuine irritation in roughly equal proportions. And she looked at Maisie, and something in her face shifted into something that wasn't either of those things. "Vehicle's waiting," Carver said. "We'll take you back to the shop." "I have my van." "Someone will bring it." She moved her eyes briefly past Lena, toward wherever Damien was standing behind her. "Mr. Voss would like to debrief tonight, when the child is settled." "Tomorrow," Lena said. A pause. "He was fairly specific about—" "Tomorrow," Lena said, and walked out into the night. Maisie fell asleep in the back seat of Carver's SUV 11 minutes into the drive, which was something children did after extreme stress that adults could not manage and that Lena had always found both remarkable and enviable. She sat turned sideways in the passenger seat so she could watch Maisie sleep, the specific, boneless quality of it, her mouth slightly open, one hand still curled loosely around the strap of her backpack, as though even in sleep she wasn't quite willing to put it down. Lena watched her breathe. In, out, in, out. She watched that for a long time. Carver drove without speaking, which was the correct decision. The county bypass unspooled ahead of the headlights, and the trees moved in the wind off the water, and the radio stayed off, and Lena was grateful for all of it. The silence, the dark, the uncomplicated continuity of the road. She would fall apart later. She was aware of this as a fact, the way you're aware of a bill that's coming due. You can know it's there without opening it yet. Later tonight, after Maisie was in bed, after the door was locked and the lights were low, she would sit somewhere and let the structure she'd been holding in place for the past 3 hours come apart. And it would be ugly and ungoverned, and she would let it happen, because the alternative was letting it accumulate somewhere internal where accumulated things became dangerous. But not yet. Right now there was the breathing, in, out. She watched it until they reached Crestwick. Oop. She did not sleep. She got Maisie upstairs, got her shoes off. Both of them, the retrieved left sneaker and its partner, reunited at last. Got her washed and into pajamas with the mechanical efficiency of someone running on a track that bypasses the parts of the brain that feel things. Maisie asked 3 questions. Was that man going to come back? Were they safe now? Could she still go to school tomorrow? Lena answered them in order. No, yes, yes. She was not certain the first two answers were accurate. She gave them anyway. After Maisie was asleep, she went back downstairs to the shop and stood in it in the dark for a while. She didn't turn the lights on. The streetlight from outside came through the front window and laid pale rectangles across the floor, and the work table, and the bucket of dahlias she hadn't managed to arrange before all of it happened, and the ghost orchid was still in its water glass on the counter, still improbably intact. She picked it up and looked at it. Then she set it face down in the waste bin. She went upstairs and sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet under the sink, and she let the structure come apart. It took about 20 minutes. It was every bit as ugly as she'd anticipated. When it was done, she washed her face at the kitchen sink and looked at herself in the toaster's reflective surface, which was the closest thing to a mirror she could face right now, and she looked bad. Red around the eyes, jaw tight, the particular drawn quality of a person who has burned through more adrenaline in one evening than most people process in a year. She made coffee. She did not drink it. At 4:47 in the morning, her phone showed a text from an unsaved number she recognized as Damien's from the digit pattern alone. It said, "She okay?" She stared at it for a long time, then typed, "Yes." Sent it, put the phone face down on the table. At 9 in the morning, she texted Carver and said, "Tell him noon, the shop." He came alone. That surprised her, though she wasn't sure why it should have. He knocked, which also surprised her, though, again, she didn't examine the logic. She unlocked the door and stepped back, and he came in, and the shop felt immediately different with him in it, in a way she couldn't quantify and didn't want to. He was wearing dark clothes, no jacket, the kind of understated that costs more than it looks like. He looked like he hadn't slept either. The scar along his jaw caught the light when he turned his head. He looked around the shop slowly, taking it in. The walls, the arrangement wall, the bucket displays, the hand-lettered price boards, the sage paint that turned different colors at different hours. He looked at all of it with the careful attention of someone reading a document they've heard described but never seen. "You built this," he said. "I built this," she agreed. "It's good." "I know." She walked to the counter and put the work table between them, not dramatically, just because it was there and it helped. "Sit down if you want." He didn't sit. He looked at her. "How is she this morning?" "Quiet. She went to school. She wanted to go." Lena wrapped her hands around a mug she'd brought down from upstairs that was still warm. "She asked me this morning if the man from last night was going to be around." Something moved across Damien's face. Too quick to parse. "What did you tell her?" he said. "I told her I didn't know yet." She looked at him steadily. "Which is true." He nodded, put his hands in his pockets. "I need to tell you some things." "I know. They may be hard to—" "Damien." She set the mug down. "I've had approximately 4 hours of something adjacent to sleep, and I've spent most of this morning explaining to an 8-year-old that the world is still safe in language that isn't a lie, but isn't the complete truth either. So please, just say the things." He said them. It took 40 minutes. He spoke with the flat economy of someone delivering a briefing, though it wasn't a briefing. It was a confession, structured like a briefing because he was a man who had never learned another way to say the things that cost him. He told her about the first time her name appeared in a Veris intelligence file 14 months ago. He told her about the holding company and the credit union and the conversations with her landlord. He told her about Norris going into the shop, which she already knew, and the expansion of the security detail afterward. He told her about the Latvian database, the assumed identities cross-reference, the week he'd estimated they had before Veris confirmed her location. He told her they'd confirmed it in 4 days. He told her that the breach, the leak that had allowed Veris to identify her name in the first place, had come from inside his own organization. That was the moment she stopped looking at the work table and looked at him instead. "Someone on your team," she said. "Yes." "Someone who knew about me." "Yes." She felt something cold move through her that was not the temperature of the room. "Who?" He looked at her directly. His jaw was set in the way she remembered, the specific tension of a man holding something in that he considered dangerous to release. "His name was Garrett Hale." He's been with my organization for 7 years, director level. He had access to the full intelligence archive, including the original files on your relocation. Had, she said. Past tense. He's in federal custody. He made a deal with the Varus network. Information in exchange for financial transfer. A pause. The transfer went through 3 months ago. He's been passing them updated surveillance on your location ever since. Lena put both hands flat on the work table. She looked at her own hands. She was aware of her breathing, the rate of it, the shallowness. She made a deliberate effort to slow it. 3 months, she said. Yes. For 3 months, someone inside your operation has been feeding them my location, my routine, my daughter's school schedule. Yes. And you didn't know. The pause before his answer was the most honest thing he'd said so far. No. She laughed. It was not a warm sound. It came out of her like something displaced, like water from a vessel that's been struck. She turned away from him and faced the arrangement wall. The dried stems, the eucalyptus bundles, the hanging lavender she'd put up in July, and she pressed her fingers hard against the surface of the work table and breathed. You built a security apparatus around my life, she said, without my knowledge or consent, for 5 years, and the breach came from inside it. Yes. So the thing that was supposed to protect us was the source of the exposure. Yes. His voice was very controlled. It was the control of someone who is not going to ask for absolution because they have decided they don't deserve it. I understand what that means. Do you? She turned back. Because what it means to me standing here is that if you had told me, if you had come to me 5 years ago and said, Lena, there is a threat and here is what I'm doing about it, and here is what you need to know, I would have been a participant in my own safety. I would have had information. I could have made decisions, and instead I was a variable in your operation, a protected asset, something to be managed from a distance. He didn't flinch. She gave him that. Yes. That's not love, she said. That's control. Dressed up in good intentions, but that's what it is. Something shifted in his face, deeper than the surface, the kind of movement that happens in the structural parts of a person. He didn't answer immediately, which meant the answer wasn't a defense. It was something else. You're right, he said. The agreement was worse, somehow, than an argument would have been. She'd prepared for an argument. She'd spent the pre-dawn hours rehearsing one. I need to know everything now, she said. Not managed, not filtered. Everything about what Varus knows, what your people know, what the threat level is right now, and what it will be in a week. If there are other Garrett Hales in your organization, we're running full internal review. Carver is heading it. I want to know the results. You'll have them. And I want someone on Maisie at all times, not invisible. Someone she can see and know and not be frightened of. Already arranged. Her name is Yuki. She's good with kids. How good? She has 2 of her own. Lena looked at him. Something that had been vibrating in her chest since the previous night shifted slightly. Not resolved, not released, but adjusted. Okay, she said. They stood there in the shop, across the work table, in the late morning light that was coming in golden and a little dishonest through the front window, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his expression. Fast, decisive. He answered it. What? He listened. His jaw tightened. How many? He listened again. When? A pause. Don't move on it yet. I'm 25 minutes out. He ended the call and looked at Lena. Reyes has picked up new Varus movement, he said. They've already replaced the team we took down last night. She stared at him. That was less than 18 hours. They're better resourced than I thought. He was already moving toward the door. I need to go. Damien, he stopped. How long until this is finished? He looked at her across the shop. The scar. The gray at his temples. The eyes that were exactly the eyes she remembered. I don't know, he said. I'm going to be honest with you from now on. That's the honest answer. He left. The bell above the door rang. Chad. Lena spent 20 minutes standing in the shop after he left, thinking in the particular way she thought when she was frightened. Not scattered, but narrowed, the way a lens focuses light to a point. She was frightened. She acknowledged it without entertaining it. Then she called Carver. "The internal review," she said when Carver picked up. "How far are you?" "We're 12 hours in. It's thorough." Hale had director-level access. What does that mean for the scope of the exposure? A pause. "It means we're treating the entire Crestwick file as potentially compromised." "All of it." "All of it." Carver's voice was careful. "Including the secondary properties. The safe house we would have moved you to if they know about it." "We're operating on that assumption." "Yes." Lena looked at the front window of the shop. At the street outside, the ordinary Wednesday morning street with its ordinary Wednesday morning people, and somewhere out there a replacement Varus team who had materialized overnight like something that grows in the dark. "The festival," she said. The Crestwick Harbor Flower Festival was in 6 days. "We've been discussing that," Carver said. "Our recommendation is that you close the booth, withdraw your participation, reduce your public exposure. If I close the booth, I lose a third of my annual revenue." "Ms. Ashcroft, I understand the risk calculus. I'm telling you the booth closing is not the solution." She turned away from the window. "They already know where the shop is. They know where the apartment is. Pulling back from the festival doesn't change my location. It just removes one point of access while costing me money I don't have." She paused. "Or is there a plan here that involves me closing the shop and moving again?" A longer pause. "That option has been discussed." Something went cold and absolute in Lena's chest. "No. It may be no." She said it with finality that she felt in her back teeth. "I am not running again. I ran once. I built this. This is Maisie's home. This is her school. These are her friends. And I am not pulling her out of the only stable life she's ever had because an organization that has already demonstrated it can rebuild overnight is going to keep coming regardless of where we go." She stopped, breathed. "The only way this ends is if they can't come anymore, which means Damien has to finish it." Carver said nothing for a moment. "He knows that. Then he needs to do it before the festival. He has 6 days. Then we'd better not waste any of them." She ended the call. She stood in the shop for another moment, in the light, in the smell of soil and water, and the green working scent of things that were alive and needed tending. Then she went to the back and put on her apron and began working the dahlias she hadn't finished yesterday, her hands moving through the familiar motions, cutting and stripping and arranging, because the flowers needed doing and the shop needed to open, and there was a child who was going to come home at 3:15 expecting something normal. She would give her normal. She would give her the most normal afternoon she could manage. And she would trust Damien Voss for the first time in 5 years to do the thing that needed doing before the thing that needed doing came back through her door. The call came at 11:47 that night. Not Damien, not Carver. An unknown number, which she almost didn't answer, which she did answer because she was still awake and her phone was in her hand, and something about the number's area code, not local, not regional, somewhere Midwest, made her pick up instead of dismiss. "Ms. Ashcroft." A man's voice. American. Mild. The kind of mild that is a deliberate performance of non-threat. "I apologize for the hour." She sat up straighter in the kitchen chair she'd been occupying for the past 3 hours. "Who is this?" "My name is Theo Wren. I'm a senior analyst with a federal organized crime task force that has been investigating the Varus network for approximately 2 years. I'm calling you because a situation has developed that you need to know about before it develops further." Something very specific happened in her chest. "How did you get this number?" "We've had a file on Damien Voss for considerably longer than 2 years, Wren said. "Your name appears in it. Not the name you're using now. The name you were born with. Ms. Ashcroft, I want to be direct with you because I think you respond to directness. We are 24 hours from moving against both the Varus network and the Voss organization simultaneously. This operation has been in planning for 18 months. We are not in a position to delay it." The room was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The harbor was a distant, neutral presence beyond the walls. "You're arresting Damien," she said, "among others. Tomorrow." "Within the next 24 to 36 hours, yes." She closed her eyes, opened them. "What does this have to do with me?" The operation requires us to pull all field assets from the Crestwick area. If we leave people in place, Varus Signals intelligence will detect the federal presence and the entire network goes dark. We need a clean approach window, which means for approximately 8 hours, you and your daughter will be unprotected. The word hit her like a physical object. 8 hours, she said. We understand the exposure. We're asking you to relocate to a federal secure facility for that window. We can have you and Maisie in a protected location within the hour. And Damien, Mr. Voss will be taken into custody at approximately 6 a.m. The Varus operation will be moved against simultaneously. By noon tomorrow, the threat against you will be resolved through federal interdiction rather than a brief pause, deliberate, extrajudicial methods. She understood what he wasn't saying. He wasn't saying, before Damien can finish it himself. He wasn't saying, we are cutting the legs out from under the only plan currently protecting you and your daughter. He wasn't saying those things because he had the careful language of a federal officer and she was a civilian. He needed cooperative. If I don't go with you, she said, Ms. Ashcroft, if I stay here, if I don't relocate, what happens to the operation? The operation proceeds regardless. Your safety during the window period becomes significantly more uncertain. She looked at the kitchen table. The notepad she'd written the threat list on 3 days ago was still there, face down. She turned it over without thinking. The list looked back at her, all the items she'd noted in careful handwriting, the accumulation of things that should have told her sooner, told her faster. I need to make a call, she said. Ms. Ashcroft, I have to advise against. I need to make one call and then I'll give you an answer. You'll have it in 5 minutes. She paused. You've been watching the situation for 2 years. You know I'm not someone who makes decisions without information. Give me 5 minutes. A pause. 5 minutes, Wren said. She called Damien. He picked up on the second ring. Lena. His voice had the specific compressed quality of someone already handling something. A man named Theo Wren just called me. He says he's federal organized crime. Silence. A beat of it. Then, Wren. You know him. I know of him. His voice had shifted. Not alarmed, something more complicated than alarmed. The register of a man adjusting rapidly to information that changes a map he thought he knew. What did he tell you? She told him. All of it. She was aware that she was potentially telling a man under federal surveillance that he was about to be arrested. And she did it anyway, because the alternative was making a unilateral decision that would strand Maisie in a federal safe house, while the only plan protecting them collapsed from under both ends simultaneously. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 full seconds. They moved the timeline up, he said. It was not directed at her. He was talking to himself in the specific way of someone realizing something. Wren's people moved the timeline up. He stopped. Lena, don't go with him. Why? Because if they pull the field assets and arrest me simultaneously, there's an 8-hour window where nobody is running active interdiction on Varus. Not my team, not federal. Everyone is in custody, processing, or operational silence. Varus will know. They always know when a net closes. They monitor federal signal traffic. She understood before he finished. They'll move in that window. A federal safe house is a known typology. They have playbooks for it. Damien, her voice was very quiet. If they arrest you, who runs interdiction? Another 4-second silence, but this one felt different. Not calculating, something more exposed than calculating. I have a contingency, he said. Reyes can hold it for 8 hours, but I need to not be in a federal processing facility for those 8 hours. A pause. Which means I need to not be arrested before this is finished. How long do you need? 24 hours. If I can get to the Varus leadership structure directly in the next 24 hours, I can collapse the network from the inside before federal interdiction makes the whole thing go dark. She stood up from the kitchen chair and walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Crestwick, at midnight, was exactly as quiet as it should have been. The streetlights made their ordinary light. A cat crossed the road near the pharmacy. Theo Wren is waiting for my answer, she said. I know. If I say no to him, he'll move on the operation anyway. but he'll know you warned me. He may try to use that as, I don't care what he uses it as. She said it calmly. I care about Maisie being safe in 36 hours. She turned from the window. Tell me what you need from me. He told her. It was not a long conversation. It was specific and operational, and it asked things of her that she would not have agreed to 48 hours ago, before Maisie's shoe on the pavement outside the school gate, before the cold concrete floor of the cannery, before she had stood in her shop and said Damien into the afternoon light and understood that the line between the past and the present had never been as solid as she'd needed it to be. When he finished, she said, If this goes wrong, I know. No, listen to me. She kept her voice even. If this goes wrong, Maisie has an aunt in Portland who doesn't know she exists. Her name is Carol Ashcroft. I have documents in a fireproof box under the sink in the back of the shop. Everything Carol would need is in there. You make sure she gets it. A silence, the kind that says something without using words. Nothing is going to go wrong, Damien said. I know you believe that, Lena said. Promise me anyway. He promised her. She called Theo Wren back. She told him she appreciated the call and understood the risk, and had decided to handle her family's security through private arrangements she was confident in. She told him this in the measured, unfrightened voice of a woman who had been making decisions alone for 5 years and was not going to be leveraged by the shape of the word federal. Wren said, Ms. Ashcroft, I need you to understand that if you interfere with a federal— I'm not interfering with anything, she said. I'm declining a voluntary relocation offer. That's my right. She paused. I hope your operation goes well. She ended the call. She set the phone on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then she went to the fireproof box under the back sink and checked that the documents were in order. The ones for Carol, the ones for Maisie, the roll of cash, the spare key. And she closed it and went upstairs and checked on Maisie, who was sleeping in the exact same position she'd been in when Lena checked an hour ago. And she stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her breathe. In, out. Then she went back downstairs to the shop, because someone had to open it in the morning, and the dahlias on the table still needed finishing. And she stood in the quiet dark of wild bloom at midnight and began to work, her hands moving through the familiar motions, because this was what she had. This was the life she had mad. She finished the dahlias at 2 a.m. and went upstairs and lay down on top of the covers with her shoes still on and closed her eyes, and did not sleep but rested, which was not the same thing, but was what was available. At 5:40, she heard Maisie moving in the next room. At 6:15, she had Maisie dressed and fed and walking toward school with Yuki, the operative Damien had assigned, a compact woman in her mid-30s with a runner's build and an easy manner with children that appeared entirely genuine, 3 steps behind them. Maisie had decided Yuki was acceptable, which she communicated by asking her 17 questions about marine biology before they reached the school gate. Yuki answered all 17. At 7, Lena opened the shop. At 7:43, Reyes called. Damien moved last night, he said. He had a low, clipped voice, not unfriendly, but efficient. He made contact with Varys through an intermediary. He's offered a meeting. Lena set down the shears she'd been using. A meeting. He's proposing direct negotiation. Syndicate leadership, him, neutral location. He's offering a financial settlement and territorial concession in exchange for a permanent withdrawal from anything involving you and Maisie. That's not the plan he described to me. No. A brief pause. The plan he described to you was the plan for if the meeting fails. She absorbed this. Where's the meeting? He hasn't told me. Reyes. Ms. Ashcroft, I'm telling you everything I have. He compartmentalized this specifically because he didn't want operational details compromised if federal surveillance picked up our internal communications. A pause that had texture to it, something sitting behind the professional neutrality. He also didn't want you to be there. He knows I'd go. That would be my assessment, yes. She looked out the front window of the shop at the street. The morning was gray, low cloud coming in off the water, the kind of October morning that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. The festival was in 5 days. The booth frame was already set up along the harbor walk. She'd done it 2 days ago before everything came apart, and it was sitting out there right now with its bare wooden skeleton, waiting for flowers and banners, and the specific organized chaos of her biggest revenue week. "What's my job?" she said. "Stay visible, keep the shop open, behave exactly as you normally would. If Varys has eyes on the shop, and they do, any deviation from your pattern tells them something is happening. So I'm the decoy. You're the anchor. You make the situation look stable while he moves." She understood the operational logic. She also understood that the operational logic required her to stand in her shop and arrange flowers while Damien Voss walked into a room with the people who had taken her daughter 48 hours ago and tried to buy them off with money and territory. And if that failed, if the meeting was a trap, if Varys decided that eliminating Damien directly was more valuable than any negotiation, there would be no signal, no warning. She would just stop hearing from him. "How will I know if it goes wrong?" she said. Reyes didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. "Keep your phone on," he said. "I'll call you." The morning passed the way mornings pass when every minute is being counted, slowly, with the specific weight of time that is being endured rather than spent. She had 2 walk-in customers before noon, a woman ordering a sympathy arrangement for a neighbor, a teenage boy buying a single stem of something for reasons he didn't articulate, paying in crumpled bills with the focused solemnity of someone conducting serious business. She helped them both. She took the money. She said the correct things. At 12:18, 2 men she didn't recognize walked past the shop front slowly. Not unusual. People walked past shop front slowly all the time. But these 2 walked in the particular way of people conducting a survey, their attention moving across the building's facade with a quality of assessment rather than casualness. And one of them glanced at the alley entrance alongside the building in a way that was not the glance of a person looking at an alley, but the glance of a person evaluating an alley. She watched them until they turned the corner. She texted Reyes. 2 men. Northwest corner, heading toward harbor. Then she went back to the arrangement she was building, a corporate weekly for the hotel account, white and green, spare and clean, and her hands kept moving while her mind ran a parallel track that had nothing to do with flowers. Reyes texted back 4 minutes later. "We have them. They're Varys peripheral, low-level surveillance. Don't respond." She set the phone down and kept working. At 2:15, Carver walked in. She was not in operational clothes. She was in civilian dress, dark jeans, a gray sweater, and she moved through the shop door and looked at Lena with an expression that had the specific controlled quality of someone managing information carefully. "What happened?" Lena said. Carver walked to the counter and leaned against it and crossed her arms. "The meeting happened. And Varys didn't send leadership. They sent 4 men with guns to a location they'd had 48 hours to prepare." She paused. Damien walked into it and walked out. 2 of his people are in a private medical facility with non-critical injuries. He's unhurt. Something in Lena's chest released a tension she hadn't fully registered carrying. The negotiation. There is no negotiation. They were never going to negotiate. Damien knew that was possible. He told me before the meeting that he gave it 40%. She looked at Lena directly. The meeting was also intelligence. He needed to know which faction of Varys was running the U.S. operation and who was directing it locally. He got that. How? One of the 4 men talked before his people extracted. Carver's voice was entirely flat. The local director is a man named Casimir Breck. He's been operating out of the abandoned cargo terminal on the South Harbor for the past 72 hours. He has 6 people with him. He has communications infrastructure, weapons, and a direct line to the European leadership. "The terminal," Lena said. She knew it. Everyone in Crestwick knew it. A sprawling derelict complex on the southern edge of the harbor. 3 enormous rusted warehouses and a collapsed loading crane, fenced off and posted with no trespassing signs that the town had been arguing about for years. "Damien is moving on it tonight," Carver said, "before the federal operation closes the window." She paused. "Ms. Ashcroft, I need you to take Maisie and go to the secondary. You said the secondary safe house is compromised. We've established a tertiary location that Hale never had access to. It's clean. I'll take you there myself." Lena looked at her. "Where is Damien right now?" Carver's pause was brief but real. "He's staging." Here? In Crestwick? South of town, a property we controlled near the marine yard. Lena untied her apron. She folded it with methodical care and set it on the work table. She looked at the hotel arrangement, which was three-quarters done. She looked at the ghost orchid she'd retrieved from the waste bin this morning and put back in its water glass, because throwing it away had felt like a statement she wasn't ready to make, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that. "Take me to him," she said. "Miss Ashcroft, Carver." She looked at her. "I have a piece of information that Damien doesn't have. Something Wren told me last night that I didn't pass on because it wasn't relevant when I thought the plan was a direct operation. It's relevant now." She picked up her jacket. "Take me to him." A long look. Then Carver pushed off the counter. "Lock the shop, Mr. The property near the marine yard was a former boat storage facility, a wide, low building with a gravel lot and a chain-link perimeter that backed up against the water. From the outside, it looked like what it was, or what it had been, utilitarian, forgettable, the kind of structure that a coastline accumulates like sediment over decades. Inside, it had been converted with the specific purposefulness of Damien's operations, cleared, wired, lit with portable LED arrays that made the space look startlingly functional against its derelict shell. There were 8 people working when Lena walked in. Reyes at a folding table with 2 monitors and a radio array. 2 men running equipment checks on gear she recognized from news footage and action films, and now recognized more viscerally as things designed to be used on human beings, others whose roles she couldn't identify. Damien was standing at a large format printed map of the terminal complex pinned to a sheet of plywood. He was talking to a man she hadn't seen before, pointing at something on the map, and he heard her come in. She knew because his hand stopped moving mid-gesture, a fractional pause before he turned. He looked tired. Not undone. Damien Voss probably couldn't look undone with a loaded gun to his head, but the specific tired that lives around the eyes of someone who has been operating at a sustained high pitch for too long. He looked at her, then at Carver. "She said she has information," Carver said. Damien studied Lena's face. He walked toward her, stopped 6 feet away, and waited. "Wren told me the terminal was in their operational file," she said. "He told me it's been a known Varus staging point for 8 months, which means it's in the federal database, which means when they move tomorrow morning, the terminal is on their target list." Damien's eyes didn't change expression, but something around them did. "They're hitting the terminal, simultaneously with moving on you. 6 a.m. She looked at him directly. "Breck will have federal surveillance on that terminal by midnight tonight. If he has any kind of signal intelligence, he'll know by 11. Damien turned back to the map. She followed. He pointed to the terminal's northeastern perimeter. "There are 3 passive sensors along this fence line. If they're monitoring federal traffic, they'll pick up the advanced positioning." He straightened, looked at Reyes. "Move the timeline." Reyes looked up from the monitors. "To when?" "Tonight, 2100. That's 4 hours. I know what time it is." "We're not fully staged. What do we need that we don't have?" "The secondary entry team isn't pull them from the north approach and consolidate south. We go in 2 points instead of 3. He turned back to the map. His finger moved to the loading bay on the southern face. "Breck will have concentrated here and here based on the water approach. He's thinking about boats, not the landward perimeter. We use that." He turned to Lena. "The information you just gave me changes the viable entry window by approximately 6 hours. That is not nothing." "I know," she said. They looked at each other. The busy noise of the facility continued around them. Equipment sounds, low voices, the radio Reyes was working, and in the middle of it they were briefly in a pocket of quiet that was just the 2 of them and everything that existed between them that neither of them had words for yet or time. "Go with Carver," he said. "The tertiary." "I know." She didn't move immediately. "Damien, Breck had 4 people at that meeting today. He has 6 at the terminal. That's 10 people. She paused. "How many people do you have in this room?" He looked at her for a moment. "Enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." His voice wasn't hard. It was something more final than hard. "Lena, take Maisie. Go somewhere clean and stay there until Reyes calls. That's what I need from you right now. The only thing." She held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she nodded once and turned and walked back to Carver. She didn't look at the map. She didn't look at the gear. She looked at the floor in front of her feet, and she walked, and Carver fell in beside her, and they went out into the gray afternoon together. The tertiary safe house was a 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on the inland side of Crestwick, 3 blocks from the water, registered under a corporate name that had no visible connection to anything. It smelled of fresh paint and the specific absence of anyone having lived there, which was its own kind of smell. Maisie arrived with Yuki at 4:15, backpack over one shoulder, with the contained, evaluating expression she'd developed in the past 48 hours, the one that said she understood more was happening than she was being told, and was choosing to accept the incompleteness of the information while holding a private reservation about it. She looked at the apartment. She looked at Lena. "Are we sleeping here tonight?" she said. "Just tonight." Maisie set her backpack down on the nearest chair with the deliberateness of someone establishing a perimeter. "Is it because of the men?" "Maisie." "The ones from the school." She looked at Lena with the dark eyes that were exactly Lena's eyes, direct and unfrightened, and already doing the work of understanding something she'd been handed without a manual. "Are they coming back?" Lena crouched down to her level. She looked at her daughter's face, the gap-toothed seriousness of it, the jaw that was set in the same way Lena's own jaw set when she was deciding something. "Some people are dealing with it right now," she said, "so that they won't come back." "Is it the man from the cannery?" A pause. "Yes." Maisie considered this for a moment with the gravity of someone reviewing a complex file. "He has sad eyes," she said finally. Lena looked at her. "Yeah," she said. "He does." Maisie nodded, apparently satisfied with the symmetry of this, and picked up her backpack and went to investigate the bedroom. The call came at 9:47 p.m. Not Reyes. Damien's number. She answered it with her heart doing something irregular against her sternum. "What's happening?" "We're at the perimeter." His voice was low, slightly compressed, the acoustics of a person speaking with particular quietness in a dark, open space. She could hear wind, harbor water. "Everything looks consistent with Rhea's thermal data. Breck is where we expected." "Okay," she said. "I wanted—" He stopped, recalibrated. "Reyes will call you when it's finished." "Damien." She kept her voice even. "What were you going to say?" A silence of maybe 4 seconds. Outside the apartment window, Crestwick was quiet. Somewhere in the building below, the hardware store's plumbing moved water through its pipes. Maisie was asleep in the next room. Yuki was in the kitchen with coffee and a book she wasn't reading. "I'm going to say it after," he said, "when this is done." "Say it now," she said. "In case." Another silence. Longer. "In case," he repeated. Not mocking. Something else. The way a person repeats a phrase when they're deciding to step through it rather than around it. "I should have come back 3 years ago, when the first Varus flag appeared. I should have come to you and told you everything and asked what you wanted instead of deciding what was best for you from 40 miles away." A pause. "That's it. That's the thing. I should have come back." Lena sat on the edge of the apartment's unfamiliar bed and pressed her free hand flat against her knee. "Go," she said. "Come back after." The line went quiet. She sat in the dark and waited. 9:58 p.m. 10:12, 10:31, and she got up and walked to the window and looked at the town, at the streetlights and the dark gap where the harbor was. And she made herself breathe at the rate of a person who is not coming apart, which required more active management than she would have liked. At 10:49, she heard it. The terminal was 400 meters from the apartment as the crow flew, and the explosion, shaped charge on a reinforced loading door, she would learn later, was not enormous by any objective measure. But in the quiet of a Crestwick Tuesday night, it was enough to reach her through the window glass as a compression of air and a sound that arrived in her bones before it arrived in her ears. Then there was silence again. Then, distantly, the sound of vehicles. Then, nothing. At 11:03, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Ms. Ashcroft. Theo Wren's voice, careful and mild as it had been the previous night. I'm going to need you to listen to me carefully. Everything in her went still. The federal operation has moved up, Wren said. We repositioned when we picked up activity at the terminal. Our teams are on site. He paused. Ms. Ashcroft. We have Damien Voss in custody. The apartment was very quiet. We also have a situation, Wren continued. Casimir Breck was not at the terminal when our teams arrived. He left approximately 90 minutes ago. We believe he was tipped, not by anyone in your circle, but by a communication intercept from within the federal operation itself. A pause. We have a leak on our end. Breck knows the net closed, and he knows that with Voss in custody and the operation dismantled, there's a window. A window, she said. He has one operative remaining. We've tracked the operative's last known position to the Creswick Town Center, approximately 3 minutes ago. Wren's voice was steady, and she hated him for the steadiness of it. Ms. Ashcroft, I need your current location. She didn't give it to him. She ended the call. She was across the apartment in 4 steps, through the door, into the kitchen, her hand already on Yuki's shoulder before Yuki had finished reacting, and she said, low and completely level, one operative, 3 minutes out, Brex. Do you have a secondary extract? Yuki was already on her feet, the book gone, the easy manner of the afternoon replaced by something that was entirely different in texture. Vehicle in the lot behind the building, keys are in the drop box by the back stairs. She was already moving toward the bedroom. Maisie first, 2 minutes. 1, Lena said, and went for the fireproof box she'd transferred from the shop this morning by habit and foresight, the 2 things she trusted most in herself, and she had it under her arm and her shoes on and her jacket half zipped by the time Yuki came out of the bedroom with Maisie, who was awake, who was in her jacket with her backpack on, who looked at her mother's face with the dark, direct eyes and said nothing at all. They went down the back stairs fast and quiet. The night air hit them cold and salt-sharp. The lot behind the building was 3 cars and a dumpster, and the specific silence of a space where nothing was happening yet. The vehicle was a dark blue sedan, unremarkable, exactly the right kind of anonymous. Yuki reached the drop box, a magnetic case attached to the underside of the dumpster, and had the key out in one motion and was moving to the driver's door when the figure came around the corner of the building, not running, walking. The deliberate walk of someone who has already run the calculations and doesn't need to hurry. He was maybe 40, lean, wearing a jacket, and he had something in his right hand that Lena identified before she'd consciously processed it, and she had already put herself between him and Maisie before her mind had caught up to her body's decision. Get in the car, she said. She said it to Maisie without looking at her. Now, back seat, down. She heard the car door. She heard Maisie move. She kept her eyes on the man. Yuki was on his left and moving. The man tracked her, which was the correct tactical response, and was also the thing Lena needed him to do, because while his eyes went left and his weapon tracked left, Lena closed the 6 feet between herself and his right side with everything she had. Not elegantly, not with training, but with the complete and unqualified commitment of a woman who had one job and had been training for it, without knowing it, for 5 years. And she hit him at the elbow joint of his gun arm with the fireproof box and felt something give, and the weapon discharged into the asphalt at an angle. And then Yuki was there, and it was over in 4 more seconds in ways that Lena didn't watch. She got in the back seat next to Maisie. Yuki got in the front. The engine started. They pulled out of the lot and onto the side street and drove at a speed that was 3 miles over the limit, which was the specific speed of someone who needed to move and could not afford to be stopped. Maisie was on the seat beside her, folded small, backpack between her feet. She had her knees pulled to her chest, and she was looking at Lena with the wide, dry-eyed expression Lena had seen at the cannery, the one that meant she was very frightened and had decided not to show it. Lena put her arm around her. Maisie leaned in, said nothing. They drove. Yuki took them to a motel 8 miles inland, the kind that took cash and didn't log names, the kind of place that existed in the specific ecosystem of American highway margins without apology or ambition. Room 14. 2 beds, a window that faced the parking lot, a bathroom with a light that flickered twice before catching. Maisie sat on the edge of the nearest bed and looked at her shoes for a while. Then she said, "Is the man from the cannery in trouble?" Lena was standing at the window, looking at the parking lot. "Yes," she said. "Right now he is." "Can we help him?" She turned and looked at her daughter, 8 years old, sitting on a motel bed in the middle of the night in a town she'd never been to, asking whether they could help the man who had pulled her out of a cannery 48 hours ago. Lena thought about the kind of person you had to be to ask that question at that moment in those circumstances, and she thought it was probably the best kind. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight we let other people do what they need to do." Maisie accepted this with the gravity it deserved. Then she kicked off her shoes, both of them, reunited now for 2 days, keeping pace, and lay down on the bed and pulled the cover over herself with the efficient economy of a child who had been through enough for one night and had decided to be done with it. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Lena sat in the chair beside the window and held her phone and watched the parking lot and waited for it to tell her something. At 2:14 a.m., Reyes called. His voice was flat in the way it was flat when he was holding something in. "Breck is in federal custody. His remaining operative is in custody. The terminal has been fully processed by federal teams." A pause. "The Varus U.S. network is finished. Wren's people pulled the financial infrastructure within the last hour. The European connection is severed." She closed her eyes. "Damien." "He's been processed at the federal facility in Harwich." Another pause, carefully weighted. "Wren is being cooperative about the circumstances. The arrest will stand, that's not negotiable, but Damien's legal team is already in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's a cooperation framework being discussed." "How long?" "Before he's out." "That's not a short conversation, Ms. Ashcroft. The charges are serious." "How long, Reyes? Give me a number." Silence for a moment. She heard him exhale, a long, honest breath. "If the cooperation framework holds and the U.S. Attorney accepts the terms his team is proposing, and there is genuine value in what Damien can offer them about the broader network, possibly 18 months. Could be less with the right arrangements. Could be more if something goes wrong in negotiations." He paused. "He wanted me to tell you that Carver has operational control of everything you need while this moves forward. Security, financial, all of it. Nothing changes for you and Maisie." Lena looked at the window, at the parking lot, empty and lit by a single sodium lamp that made everything the color of old paper. "He planned for this," she said. "He planned to get arrested." A long pause. "I think he planned for the possibility. He cooperated with Wren. I think he made a call at some point in the last 24 hours about which outcome was actually the right one. Not the one he wanted. The right one." Reyes's voice was careful, precise, with something that wasn't quite professional distance anymore. "He's been doing that for a long time, making the call that costs him personally." She said nothing. "Get some sleep," Reyes said, not unkindly. "I'll call if anything changes." He ended the call. She sat in the chair for a long time. The flickering bathroom light had settled into steadiness, finally. Maisie breathed evenly on the bed. The parking lot was still and orange-lit and entirely ordinary, and Lena sat in it all. The ordinariness, the stillness, the specific exhaustion of a body and mind that had been running at an unsustainable pitch for 72 hours, and she let it settle over her like sediment settling in water after something large has moved through it. She didn't cry. She'd already done that. She was on the other side of it now, in the territory past tears, where things simply were what they were, and the only question was what you did with them. She looked at Maisie. She would tell her something true in the morning, not all of it. She would earn the rest of the truth as Maisie got older and could hold more of it. But something real. Something that honored what Maisie had already figured out with those dark, direct eyes. That would be a start. She went back to Crestwick in the morning. She drove herself in the shop van that Carver had delivered to the motel parking lot sometime before dawn. Maisie in the passenger seat eating a gas station granola bar with the focused attention she gave all food. The coast road was bright and cold, the water running blue and silver under an October sky that had finally decided to commit to being clear. "Are we going to stay?" Maisie said. She said it as though they were continuing a conversation they'd been having, even though they hadn't been. "In Crestwick." Yes, Lena said. Good. Maisie picked a nut fragment off the granola bar and ate it separately, which she always did. I told Yuki about my diorama. She said anglerfish are good. They have bioluminescence. They do. She said real deep zone fish are much scarier than the ones people usually pick for projects. She said I should find the most extreme one. Did you? The barrel eye fish. It has a transparent head. You can see its brain. Maisie looked satisfied by this. Dylan is going to be upset. Lena drove and felt, quietly and without ceremony, something that had been locked at a particular tension in her chest for 5 years shift slightly. Not release. That would have been too clean. Just shift. Adjust. Like a bone that is healed imperfectly but is learning to bear weight in a new way. They crossed into Crestwick at 8:40. She pulled past the harbor walk. The festival framework was still there, her booth skeleton, bare and waiting, alongside a dozen other half-built structures from other merchants. In 4 days it would be transformed. She would make sure of that. She parked behind the shop and they went in through the back. The dahlias she'd finished at 2 in the morning 2 nights ago were past their best, but still standing. She put Maisie at the small table in the back corner with her backpack and a glass of orange juice, and told her she'd walk her to school in an hour, and then she put her apron on and began to assess what needed doing. There was a lot that needed doing. There always was. She started with the hotel order. She was 20 minutes into it when the shop's front bell rang. Theo Wren was alone, which she hadn't expected. He was in civilian clothes again, navy jacket, no tie, the deliberate, unthreatening presentation of a federal officer who wanted a conversation rather than a confrontation. He looked at the shop with the same careful attention Damien had looked at it 3 days ago, which was a coincidence she noted without knowing what to do with. He stopped at the counter. She stayed on the other side of it. "I could have handled the introduction better," he said. "Yes," she said. "You could have." He accepted this without defense. Breck is in federal holding. His operative has agreed to a full cooperation debrief in exchange for leniency. The information obtained from the terminal sweep, combined with what we already had, has given us enough to move on the European structure within the next 6 months. He paused. "The threat to you and your daughter is over, Ms. Ashcroft. I want you to hear that from me directly." She looked at him. "Is Damien being charged?" Wren's expression did something careful. "Mr. Voss made a proactive approach to my office approximately 22 hours ago. He provided information and documentation on the Veris financial network, the Latvian database operation, and 3 other criminal organizations operating within our jurisdiction." He paused. He also provided documentation on his own organization's activities over the past 7 years. Voluntarily, without a deal in place first. She let that settle. "He walked into your office," she said, "before the terminal, before the arrest. Shortly before, yes, he made the approach, provided the documentation, and then indicated that he understood there would be legal consequences for him personally and that he accepted them." Wren looked at her with an expression she was having trouble reading. Not pity, not professional satisfaction, something more honest than either. "In my experience, Ms. Ashcroft, people in his position don't do that. They negotiate, they minimize, they find leverage. They don't walk in and put everything on the table and ask for nothing in return." He asked for nothing. He asked that the information be used to protect 2 people, that the outcome for them be, and I'm quoting him, clean. Wren paused. That was the word he used. Lena turned away from him. She faced the arrangement wall and looked at it without seeing it. Outside, through the front window, Crestwick was doing what it did on a bright October morning. The hardware store was opening. A woman was walking a dog. A delivery truck was attempting a 3-point turn on the narrow street with the resigned persistence of delivery trucks everywhere. "What happens to him now?" she said. "His legal team and the U.S. Attorney's Office are working through a cooperation framework. The documentation he provided has genuine value. It's going to make our operation significantly more effective and substantially reduce the network's ability to reconstitute." Wren chose his next words with visible care. "I'm not in a position to make promises about timelines. I can tell you that the cooperation is being taken seriously at the level where these things are decided." He paused. and I can tell you that the charges reflect what the evidence supports, which, given the nature of the voluntary disclosure, is considerably less than what a full investigation would have produced. She turned back, looked at him. How long? He looked at her steadily. Best case. 8 months, if the framework holds and the cooperation continues to produce results. He paused. That's genuinely the best case. I'm not inflating it. 8 months. She nodded once. Thank you for coming. He took that for the dismissal it was. He moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. The Flower Festival, he said, in 4 days. He looked at the booth framework visible through the window. My daughter does ceramics. She has a booth 2 down from yours, apparently. He looked back at her. She's been doing it for 3 years. I never make it. Something passed across his professional face, something human. Maybe this year. He left. Lena stood alone in the shop for a long moment. Then she went to the back and told Maisie it was time for school. The letter came 11 days later. No return address, postmarked from Harwich, which was where the federal facility was. She knew the handwriting from years ago, tight, compressed, the penmanship of a person who had learned to write in a hurry and never slowed down enough to unlearn it. She read it at the work table in the back of the shop, standing up, still in her apron. It was 2 pages, handwritten, and it was the most words she had ever seen him put in sequence at one time. He was not a man who wrote things down because writing things down was evidence, and evidence was liability, and he had spent 15 years treating all of it accordingly. He wrote about the holding company and the credit union and the landlord conversation, and he named amounts and dates with the specificity of someone who needed her to know these were not abstractions, that he had tracked them and made them deliberate, that each one had been a decision he'd made consciously rather than a system operating without him. He wrote about the night 4 years and 7 months ago when a man had followed her home from the night market and what had happened to that man, and he named it plainly without euphemism and without apology and without asking her how she felt about it. Then he wrote, I told myself it was protection. It was also control, the way you said. Those things can both be true. I've been thinking about whether they cancel each other out, and I don't think they do. I think they both just sit there together, and you have to hold both of them at once and decide what to do with that. Then he wrote, Maisie asked Yuki whether anglerfish are the most extreme deep-sea fish. Yuki told me. I looked it up. The barrel-eye fish has a transparent skull and rotatable eyes and lives at 900 meters down where there is no light at all. She picked well. Then he wrote, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that no is a complete answer that I will accept without discussion. When this is finished, and it will be finished, 8 months is not forever. I would like to come to Crestwick, not to stay, not to assume anything, not to pick up something that ended a long time ago, just to come, to be in the same room with you and Maisie without a crisis running in the background, to see what the shop looks like in person instead of on a sensor feed, to find out whether there's anything left between us that wants to exist in ordinary daylight. You don't have to answer this now. You don't have to answer it at all until you're ready. I'll wait. That's the one thing I've always been able to do. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the fireproof box under the back sink, next to the documents for Carol in Portland and the roll of cash and the spare key and all the other things she kept because keeping things mattered, because the physical fact of a thing in a box was a kind of promise to yourself that you hadn't yet decided to abandon. She went back out front and finished the arrangement she'd been working on. But the Crestwick Harbor Flower Festival ran for 3 days in mid-October, and it was, by every measurable standard, the best one Lena had managed since opening Wild Bloom 4 years ago. She had 3 part-time helpers she'd finally hired, a retired teacher named Bev who had been asking for the job for 2 years, and 2 art students from the college up the coast who were unreliable about time but exceptional with color. The booth was the best she'd built. She'd used the full budget, which for the first time in the shop's history she actually had, and she'd designed it around a deep autumn palette. Burgundy dahlias, rust chrysanthemums, copper beech branches, the ghost orchid placed in a small glass case at the center of the display, like an exhibit, like something worth preserving. It drew people in the way beautiful things draw people, not loudly, not with effort, just by existing and letting itself be seen. She sold out by 3 p.m. on the second day. Maisie spent the festival running between Lena's booth and the adjacent ceramics stall 2 booths down, whose proprietor turned out to be a 16-year-old girl who was Theo Wren's daughter, and who had a serious technical approach to her craft and infinite patience for 8-year-old questions. Wren appeared on the second afternoon, hands in his jacket pockets, and stood at a distance watching his daughter work, and Lena watched him watching her, and she understood something about him she hadn't understood before, which was that he was a person trying to close the distance between his professional life and the parts of his life that mattered, and that this was its own kind of hard work. And she didn't hold the past 2 weeks against him in any particular way. He caught her eye once, across the crowded walk. She nodded. He nodded back. That was the whole of it. On the last night of the festival, after the crowds had thinned and the harbor lights were doing their particular thing with the water, Lena sat on the edge of the booth's low platform and looked at what remained of the display and tallied what she had in her head. Not the money, though that too. The money was genuinely good, the best October she'd had. But the other things. The sum of them. She had a shop she had built from $38 over rent. She had a daughter who had been through things that would leave marks that neither of them could fully see yet, and who had responded to those things by researching deep-sea fish with transparent skulls, which was perhaps the best possible response. She had a town that she'd initially chosen as a hiding place, and had somehow, without fully meaning to, become genuinely attached to. Its rhythms and its ordinary people, and its harbor light that was different at every hour of the day. She had a letter in a fireproof box that she had not yet answered. She had, she supposed, 8 months. Carver appeared from somewhere. She always appeared from somewhere, materialized with the particular unobtrusiveness of someone whose professional competence included not being noticed until she was needed. She sat down on the platform beside Lena and looked out at the harbor. Revenue was good, she said. Very good. Yuki's final assessment is that the threat environment is cleared. She's recommending we scale back the active detail. She paused. You'll have 1 check-in contact point. That's all. Lena looked at the water. How is he? Carver considered the question. Adjusting, she said finally. It was a diplomatic word, and probably accurate. He's cooperating with the federal process. He's divesting from the parts of the operation that need divesting. It's not fast work. She paused. He has Reyes handling the legitimate business transitions. There are 7 companies that are being moved into fully lawful management, a private security consulting firm, 3 real estate holdings, a logistics operation, 2 financial management entities. She paused again. He's been thorough, more thorough than he had to be. He does things completely, Lena said. Or not at all. That was always true. Yes. Carver looked at the water beside her. He asked me to give you something. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a small envelope, sealed, and handed it over. Lena looked at it, then opened it. Inside was a key, an ordinary key, the kind cut at a hardware store, with a small paper tag attached to it. Written on the tag in Damien's compressed handwriting was an address in Crestwick, 3 blocks from the harbor, a street she walked sometimes, and below the address, a single line. The lease is in your name. Do with it what you want. She turned the key over in her fingers. It was a warm, ordinary metallic weight. It felt like a significant amount of trust compressed into a very small object. What's at this address? She said. Larger retail space, ground floor, good light, storage in the back. Carver paused. It's 3 times the square footage of the current shop. Lena looked at the key. She thought about what you could do with 3 times the square footage, the wholesale volume, the staff, the event florals she'd been turning down for 2 years because she didn't have the capacity to produce them. She thought about what it would mean to build something larger, something that had room to grow, something that didn't require her to be everywhere at once just to keep it from collapsing. She thought about what it meant that he had leased it in her name without asking. She thought about that for a while. Tell him thank you, she said. You can tell him yourself, Carver said. Eventually. Yes, Lena said. I can. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that was not dramatically different from the Tuesday morning that had started all of this, Lena Ashcroft stood in the empty retail space at the address on the key's paper tag and looked at what it was and what it could become. The floors were concrete, which was good. Flowers needed something that could take water without complaint. The light came in through two large south-facing windows that turned the interior a clean, warm white in the mornings. The storage room in the back was properly ventilated, which she hadn't dared to hope for. There was a loading access on the side alley that would work for wholesale deliveries. Maisie was at school. Bev was running the current shop for the morning. Outside on the street, Crestwick was doing what it always did, existing at its own pace, unimpressed by urgency, accustomed to the rhythms of the water and the seasons and the ordinary rotation of people's ordinary needs. Lena walked the length of the space. Her footsteps on the concrete were the only sound. She walked it slowly, the way you walk a thing you're learning, not measuring, not planning yet, just occupying it, letting herself exist inside it and feel what it had to offer. She stopped at the south-facing windows. The street outside was familiar. She'd walked it 100 times. The hardware store 2 doors down, the coffee place on the corner where the owner always had too much seasonal merchandise and not enough seating. The gap between buildings through which, if you stood at the right angle, you could see a strip of harbor water catching the light. She stood at the window and looked at the street, and the street looked back, and she thought about the word clean. The word Damien had used with Wren, the thing he had asked for when he'd walked into a federal office and put everything on a table and asked for nothing except that outcome. She thought about what it cost to want something clean when you had spent 15 years in the business of making things complicated. She thought about whether clean was something you could build toward or whether it was something that either was or wasn't. She decided it was something you built toward. She decided it slowly and without drama, the way you decide the things that actually hold. She put the key in her pocket. She took out her phone. She called Bev and told her to reschedule the hotel walkthrough from Thursday to Friday and to tell them the consultation would be expanded because there were going to be some changes to the service capacity in the new year. Bev said, "Oh, thank goodness. I've been waiting for you to figure this out." Lena said, "I've been a little busy." "You're always a little busy. That's the problem." Bev paused. "Is this a good change or a nervous change?" Lena looked at the empty space, at the concrete floors and the good light, and the properly ventilated storage and the loading access on the side alley, and the south-facing windows through which the street looked back at her, with the impassive familiarity of a place that has agreed to let you belong to it. "Good," she said. "It's a good change." She pocketed the phone. She walked back through the space one more time, slowly, and then she went out the door and locked it behind her and put the key in her jacket pocket where she could feel the weight of it against her hip. And she walked back toward the current shop through the October morning, past the hardware store and the coffee place, and through the gap between buildings where the harbor light was doing its specific thing with the water, which was different from how it looked at noon or at evening or at 2 in the morning when she'd sat in the dark and tried to remember what she was made of. In the morning, it looked like the beginning of things. She walked through it and let it. 8 months is not forever. It passed the way months pass when you are living them rather than surviving them, with friction and boredom and the specific rewards of small progress accumulated over time. Bev turned out to be the best hire Lena had ever made, with an organizational instinct that made the new space's opening, 3 months after Lena first walked it, feel almost smooth. The art students from the coast came back, more reliable about time now, and brought 2 friends. A woman named Sal, who had run a plant nursery for 20 years, came on as the wholesale buyer and immediately made herself indispensable. Wild Bloom grew into something Lena hadn't let herself imagine. Maisie's barrel eye diorama won the school science display, which she received with the satisfied composure of someone who had known this was the right choice from the beginning. She started asking, around February, more specific questions about the man from the cannery. Not afraid questions, not accusatory questions, but the calibrated questions of a child building a picture from available parts. Lena answered them truthfully, each one, at the level of detail Maisie was actually asking for. She found this, to her surprise, easier than she'd expected. The truth was less complicated than the architecture she'd built around keeping it. Spring came in off the harbor with the particular aggression of coastal springs, cold and bright and insistent, and the new shop's south-facing windows turned it into something that warmed every arrangement Lena worked on. The call from Reyes came on a Thursday morning in April. "He's out," Reyes said. Simple as that. "Cooperation framework completed. Federal processing finished yesterday. He's out." She was standing at the main work table with a branch of flowering quince in her hand. She set the branch down. "Is he in Crestwick?" she said. "Not yet. He's in the city. He said to tell you he's not going to show up. He said to tell you that he'll wait for you to say if you want him to come." A pause. "He was very specific about that." She looked at the south-facing windows, at the light coming in, at the flowering quince on the table, which was an early-season thing, tentative and extravagant at the same time in the way of early-season things. She thought about the letter in the fireproof box. She'd read it many times, not obsessively, practically. It was a document she returned to when she needed to check what she actually thought against what she was tempted to think instead. She thought about what he'd asked, whether there was anything left that wanted to exist in ordinary daylight. She knew the answer. She had known it for some time. The knowing wasn't the complicated part. "Tell him to come Saturday," she said. "The shop opens at 9. Tell him to come at 9:15. Reyes said, "I'll tell him." She picked the quince branch back up and went back to work. He knocked. 9:17. She heard the bell, heard it open, heard the footstep on the entry mat, and she was in the back getting a bucket, and she stayed there for 3 full seconds before she walked out. He was standing just inside the door, hands in his pockets, looking at the arrangement wall. The new wall, in the new space, which was larger than the old one and filled with more variety, more density, more of everything she'd been able to expand into in the past 5 months. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the old shop the morning he'd stood across the work table from her and confessed, like a document, like something he was reading carefully. The scar along his jaw, the gray at his temples, more of it now. The eyes exactly the eyes she remembered, which was both easier and harder than she'd prepared for. Maisie was in the back at her table, with her school reading. She had been told who was coming. She had said, with the dark-eyed gravity that was entirely her own, "Okay, just that." Then she'd gone back to her book. Damien turned when he heard Lena. They looked at each other across the shop. "You expanded," he said. "I used the space well," she said. "That's usually how it works." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not the surface, the structural parts. He was doing what she'd seen him do at the cannery, on the concrete floor, looking at her and Maisie with everything visible and nothing demanded. "The quince," he said. He nodded at the arrangements along the left wall. "That's new. Early spring. It won't last." "It's good while it lasts." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is." Neither of them moved. The shop was quiet around them, the working quiet of a place that was alive and doing what it was built to do. The hum of the cooler, the drip of the water buckets, the distant sound of the harbor. Then from the back, clearly and without preamble, Maisie's voice. The barrel-eye fish can also rotate its eyes upward to look for prey silhouetted against the surface light. Most people don't know that part. A pause. Then Damien said, at a volume that carried, "I knew the transparent skull part. I didn't know about the eyes." Another pause. Footsteps. Maisie appeared in the doorway to the back room, book under her arm, looking at him with the frank, evaluative attention she gave everything that was new and potentially interesting. "That's the most important part," she said. "The skull is just the delivery mechanism. The eyes are what make it work." Damien looked at her. The thing on his face then was not professional and not guarded and not calibrated. It was something much simpler and much more exposed than any of those things. He looked at Maisie looking at him, and he nodded with the seriousness the observation deserved. "You're right," he said. "The eyes are what make it work." Maisie considered him for another moment. Then she went back to her table, apparently satisfied. Lena watched this. Then she looked at Damien. He looked back at her. 9:15, he said. "You said 9:15. I know what I said. I was here at 9:12. I waited in the car." She almost smiled. She let it almost happen and then steadied it out because there was still work to do. Not the enormous work that was behind them now, but the ordinary ongoing work of two people deciding whether to try, which was its own kind of labor and deserved its own kind of honesty. "There's a coffee place on the corner," she said. "When Bev gets in at 10, I take a break. 20 minutes. He looked at her. "That's what I have right now," she said. 20 minutes at 10 o'clock. He nodded. "I'll be here." She turned back to the work table, picked up the quince branch, heard him move to look at the arrangement wall again, quietly, with the patience of a man who had spent years learning that patience was not weakness, but the only form of endurance that actually held. Outside, the harbor was doing its morning thing with the light. The street was ordinary and familiar and moving at its own pace. The south-facing windows brought the whole of it in, the light and the salt air, and the sound of the town doing what towns do on April Saturday mornings, which was simply continue, breathing in and breathing out, making its various small noises, offering its ordinary life to whoever was awake enough and still enough to receive it. Lena worked her flowers. The clock moved. The light held.